Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 172 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Joe Dupriest, the managing partner and co-founder of NextUp Ventures and NextUp Partners. Joe has a long background from the sports industry and has worked for Washington Capitals, Philadelphia Eagles, the Redskins, and more. His educational background is in engineering, and he has been able to merge skills from engineering and marketing to reach great success in the sports industry. We spoke about engineering versus marketing, managing remote teams, being an analytical leader, bringing analytics to marketing, why the sports industry is lagging, why he left team sports, and much more. Joe Dupriest, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. It's be fun.
Yeah, it's this is going to be a good one. Really excited to have you on the show. You are the managing partner and co-founder of NextUp Ventures and many years in the sports industry. But can you tell us a little bit about, before we get into your history, what is NextUp Ventures and what's your role there?
Yeah, so we've actually got two companies, NextUp Ventures, NextUp Partners, that we started kind of right around COVID. Got the NextUp Ventures side, we facilitate fundraise primarily for early stage sports tech funds, and then we got the partner side, which consults for companies, large and small, some pre-seed, seed stage companies, some bigger brands, teams, leagues around AI, PR, web development, graphics, marketing strategy, kind of any and everything. We've got a team of experts we bring in to work with those companies, and those just work side by side to find the company's need and try to fill them.
Interesting. So how come that you wanted to, co-found your own business? You have been in sports for a long time, worked with on the team side. So what made you take this step to start something on your own?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Prior to this, I was commuting to Chicago for a role with a loyalty platform, and flying up to there every week was kind of becoming a lot. Of course, had I known COVID was coming, I probably could have kept the job and not had to fly, but that happened. And so really the idea behind it was lifestyle flexibility. We've got 4 kids now, at the time 3 with a 4th on the way, and the flexibility, as great as it was working on the team side, going to an arena or a stadium 3-4 nights a week, not really realistic. And so this gave me the flexibility. Plus, with this, you can work with who you want, where you want, when you want, find the right clients, and customize everything. And with COVID at the time, we really built a 1099 model that, a lot of the people that we know and work with for many years, some of the longest 25 years, were looking for kind of their next role. So we were able to kind of, get the band back together in a way of speaking, and it really, build a really solid team that we trust and have worked with, that we know we could work well together. So it just made a lot of sense at the time.
Yeah. So did COVID play in there? Because this was August 2022, that was like the peak of COVID in the beginning. So everyone, working from home and having this more like hybrid work role, did that play in as well?
It did. And so we initially started NextUp Ventures with the idea that we'd make some small investments, kind of facilitate fundraise. Didn't really know we're going to go kind of dip our toe into the venture side. And then COVID was really kind of got the idea that, hey, maybe there's a new consulting model here. Companies were used to fractional work. In the startup world, it's always been usual, but in the sports world, not as much. Fractional work, remote work was becoming, sort of the norm. And even still after that, it sort of is in a lot of areas. And so with the talent that we had available to us and the new work structure, that really played into why it made sense at the time, which, we kind of had the idea around the consulting side, but that really accelerated that, hey, this is probably really a good opportunity for us to jump in on.
So as a manager and, leading people, what's your opinion about remote work and hybrid work, or being at, 100% at in the workplace? Where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on the type of work. For us, it's been great because we have clients all over the country. And so many of them, especially the startup world, really, work, remotely, as well. And so this enables us to really cover the entire country to be able to serve clients and, more on a fractional basis. And so for us, it works well. For a team, would it work? Probably not. You got games, you have live events, you have things to be there. Does flexibility make sense? Yeah. And so some sort of a hybrid model, I think, makes sense almost everywhere. And I think, people really came to appreciate, just that flexibility. Here, I live in Atlanta. It's, if you want to commute into the office, it's, at least an hour there, an hour back. That's 2 hours out of your day right there. If you can save that a couple times a week, it works out well. Especially, kids sports and everything else that, hey, if I've got to be in a practice at 5:30, I can work at home until 5:15 if I'm working in an office, trying to get out of there earlier. Just, it becomes a talent drain a bit as well. Some of the higher level talent are going to go where you can get that flexibility. And so I think some companies got to realize that. But I mean, there's a lot of value to, the camaraderie, just, being in the office setting and the face to face, that sort of stuff for certain industries, I think makes sense. And it's just, what model works for what company, I think.
Yeah. So I found an article when I did research here that says 5 things you need to know to successfully manage a remote team. So what are some key factors you said to be able to successfully manage it? Because if you don't meet as often and, you're away more, what's some key?
I mean, a lot of it is building the right team, building a team, which for us, it's a team that we trust. I've worked with, people, for many years. And so no one work's going to get done. We don't need to check in, it's, just, being able to, still have, consistent expectations. You got to set the right expectations for everybody and, hold people accountable for everything. You got to hold the entire team accountable. It's easy for people to fly under the radar. And so, the appropriate level of check-ins and tracking and everything else. But again, it's, hire, you got to hire the people that can do it. Everybody's not set up for that. So if you have the right hiring practices and bringing the right people, then you can make it work. I mean, some people are just never, they're going to take advantage of it. And so, it's really, being able to, hire and avoid those situations, which, can be hard. And then, being willing to make a change when you need to make a change for that. But it's accountability. It's got to be team accountability. It can't just be the leader. It's got to be everybody holding everybody else accountable and being really open and transparent.
Gary Vaynerchuk usually says that you need to hire fast and fire fast. Because a lot of people maybe put pride into, if you hire someone, you feel like you don't want to admit that you made the wrong call. But on the other hand, the longer the wrong person stays, that will negatively impact the team as a whole.
Exactly. And for our model, we're all 1099. So if it turns out somebody's not holding up their end of the bargain, then we just don't bring them in on another project. With a full-time employee, certainly it's harder, but you got to do it. I mean, you got to be willing to have the hard conversations. And, as soon as an issue is there, you got to bring it to light. You got to address it. If they don't, adjust for it, then you got to move on. Because, especially, with a startup, time is money and, you can't be burning capital and, going through those issues. So you got to be able to adjust, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. If we go down memory lane a little bit, and then we will circle back to where we are now, but how did you get into sports in the first place?
It was interesting. So I went to Georgia Tech as an undergrad. I was always the math guy, growing up. I'm like, of course I'm going to be an engineer. You go to Georgia Tech. But then when I was a freshman at Tech, one of our projects was to interview somebody in a field you're interested in. And of course, this was kind of even pre-email. This was, late 90s. I think I hand wrote a letter to John Schuerholz, the GM of the Braves. And he sent it to Dean Taylor, who's their assistant GM. I went in, at the stadium and talked to him, and not related whatsoever to what my, degree path was, but, kind of really digging into sports and the future and that sort of stuff. And so that really kind of got me interested in it. And so instead of going mechanical engineering, I went industrial, which is sort of more management based, but still, engineering jobs are a lot easier to find. They're coming to recruit on campus, went down that path, did that for a few years at FedEx, said, hey, this isn't really what I want to do. Went back to business school. And then, fortunately at the time, it was 2002, 2004, there's really no analytics within sports marketing. So that was sort of when the light bulb went off of, hey, I've got an engineering analytic background. Teams are not using that. Hey, I can kind of carve my own path, which now, I mean, you see analytics jobs posted all the time. And, some teams have 10, 15 person departments. I mean, none of them had any, which, I'm competing with nobody at that point, so I went in with the Durham Bulls, the minor league baseball team, doing market research and, a lot of the analytics behind it, did regression analysis, ad spend models, that sort of stuff for the Carolina Hurricanes, really kind of carved my own path there. And that was really what gave me, I think, a leg up that, hey, nobody else was doing this. How do I leverage my background? And that's what I did, and successfully ended up, initially with the Philadelphia Eagles coming right out of business school.
That's so interesting, because if you look at it, marketing might seem a little bit fluffy, and engineering is very squared. You're in the box. It's math. It's, it's more, binary, you can say. But you found this way to bring the analytics and everything into marketing. And as you said, like now that's standard, but 20 years ago, that was not at all the case.
No, nobody was doing anything with it. In sponsorship deals, they weren't looking for it either. They were just buying signs and, it's almost a vanity play on the sponsorship. But then eventually sponsors are like, hey, what am I getting for my money here? Show me something. And teams had to figure it out. And so we were sort of at the forefront of figuring it out. And then even, with the Washington Capitals, we were one of the first ones to really do sponsorship valuation. Hey, let's go in and value everything, based on the impressions, based on, the value of the eyeballs that we're creating. And how do we actually put value to that, measure it for a sponsor and show that, that became unnecessary. And even still, it's probably not where it should be, but, sponsors expect that and teams are able to generate that more. And even from a, general marketing standpoint, how do you know you're getting the right message to the right people? Everything used to be in mass. Now it's got to be, if you can go hyper personalized, great, but at least, segmenting in the right way and targeting the right messages to the right people. We were one of the first ones to start. Actually, we were the first NHL team to start a female only fan club. And so we measured, hey, where's the opportunity? Where is it now? Really diving into focus grouping and market research and really create a platform that then we're able to measure that actually the rate of female fan growth of the Capitals was, moving faster than the male fan growth. And so being able to really target that and figure out, hey, here's what we're doing working or not, versus, hey, we're going to do it for a while. And then, hey, maybe it worked, maybe we didn't, we don't know. And so bringing that level of value became very important.
What did you see was the importance of the segmenting the customer base? As you said, like you had the women's fan club, like what else, what benefit do you see when you segment the customer base?
I think what you have from a fan standpoint is a bunch of, varying levels of fanship. You sort of go through you've got generational fans. Philadelphia has a lot of generational fans. Washington, D.C. really didn't. The Capitals came in the mid 70s. They weren't really that good through the 80s, 90s. You had the one Stanley Cup, final appearance, but, they didn't have that historical. My dad was an Eagles fan. His dad was an Eagles fan. So it's, so it's different from that standpoint. It's are you a single game? Can you afford single game tickets? Would you like to be a season ticket holder? Can you afford it? So really creating something to touch every fan point from hey, if you're the, a longtime fan with a lot of money, hey, we've got something for you. If you want to get into some games, more affordably, or if you want free events, or, we had a Capitals convention we created to target fans that, want to get close to the team but can't afford tickets. And, the other piece of it is, how do you create a 365-day a year fan experience? It's not just about the games, so because eventually all the game, fans that aren't going to the games, you want to get them there because there's got to be longevity here. You can't just do it about winning. If you're winning and seats are filled, that's great. What happens when you start losing? So if you're not nurturing those fans in advance of that, then you're going to be in a mess. And, we got to be able to identify those fans and serve them the right value in the right way.
And then follow up to see that these initiatives that you have taken, that if they pay off or not. And that's what I wanted to ask you about when you said that to bring in analytics into the marketing, the Capitals, and were they open to when you brought up these ideas, or were they hesitant to having the analytics, or was that something that they had gotten asked already from the customers, or did you get pushback from that? That's basically my question.
Depends on who you talk to within the organization. But I think what's been interesting around team ownership, especially Ted Leonsis, you've got, owners coming from very successful businesses, outside of the sports that are really hands-on and have seen this stuff work elsewhere. So when you're bringing something other companies are doing, because the sports is always going to lag a little bit with analytics, with technology, with whatever it is. But I mean, there was a strong interest, from top managers from that side of, hey, let's really understand this. Because it's also, hey, we've got to generate more sponsorship dollars. How do we do that? It's got to be outside of the actual arena. So to really bring that side of it in. And, we would run, an annual brand survey. We asked people about everything that we did, segmented them all out based on their responses, sponsor activations, event experience, awareness of sponsors. I mean, it was, a really robust survey that we would do. And then from that, we would really dive in more, maybe with some focus groups, maybe with some, targeted surveys around development of youth hockey and kids and where we can reach them and all of that, which all of that then creates additional sponsorship assets, which are going to, increase your sponsorship revenue beyond just, your in-game experience. And so when you put the revenue spend to the value you're going to get off of it, then, suddenly everybody becomes interested in that.
Yeah, I understand that. Why do you think it is that sports is lagging, as you said, in many of these things, like to bring in analytics? Because I feel like that's the case in other areas as well, that the sports industry is adapting to things slower than other industries.
It's just the way they operate. They're run a lot of times like, small businesses, even though, they're billion-dollar entities, the money is going on the team and, the team side. There's not a lot of, money going into, the actual business side of it. And the money that is going in there is going directly to, ticket sales and those sort of initiatives. So if it's something you can't directly tie revenue to, then, budgets just aren't that big and staffs aren't that big. It's, even, with the analytics departments they have now, they could certainly be a whole lot bigger to do what they want to do. But to get teams to invest in a new technology, it's significant investment that's going to divert resources from something else. And so it's really that almost mom and pop mentality that sports have always had, which is less now, than it was 20 years ago. But it still exists there. They're still small staffs, a lot of junior employees, and the focus just isn't on those areas. Even though the owners a lot of times, they would love to do it. But we did Google Glass, which, I always kind of thought, hey, this probably ain't really going to be anything, but hey, it's cool. Everybody's talking about it. We actually found a company in DC that created an app for us for free. We got in Forbes, all that sort of stuff. They love that, but it didn't cost us anything. We were able to sort of do it that way, but to get, development resources and that sort of stuff and divert them away, is hard. But I mean, there's certainly value to it. And you're starting to see that more with, some of the owners with their own angel funds and focusing on the venture side. You're seeing that with a lot of teams now too, which you can then take those companies without any downside risk and pop them in. But even still, you need somebody on the team side that's going to implement these technologies and that sort of stuff. And there's already enough hours going into just, the in-arena experience in the game day. I mean, there's not excess hours to, hey, now we're going to add this to it. And so you get a lot of pushback with that as well.
Yeah, I understand that. So, but it makes it even more interesting that you seem to have been like an early adopter to many things within the sports industry. You were early with OTT for the regional sports. You were early in the sports betting space, and also we talked with analytics. So you think that you have an eye for what's to come, or do you just see that something is working in a different field and they could be implemented in sports?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I have an eye for it. See, as a marketing guy, I won't say I'm the most creative guy, but I know good creative when I see it. We created the Rock the Red campaign for the Capitals that went on for a decade plus. I didn't come up with it, but when we got in a room and we got there, we can make it come to life and really make it succeed. I think from a trend standpoint, it's there. But Monumental, it was really the support of ownership. It was bringing this in that Ted was going to look at media rights different than everybody else. He was the first one to really start focusing on, hey, we're not a sports team, we are a media company. And so with that, hey, OTT starts to develop, and we had resources too. The Bulith platform that we built OTT on, initially was a company called Snag Films that Ted had invested in. It was about distributing independent films. And so, but it turned out, hey, we've got this great technology. Why don't we use it for OTT? So we had those resources available, but having that support of ownership was huge. But, I've always, trying to think about what's next, what are people really going to be into? How do you monetize things differently? Because you have to constantly evolve, and just seeing so many teams that, kind of go like this, and their success is how do you flatten that curve, and kind of looking at everything from there's a brand standpoint, a fan standpoint, a revenue standpoint, and kind of looking at all of that. And where's the opportunity? What do we look like? 6 months from now, but what do we look like 5 years from now, and being able to get that mindset into the organization.
I think that's so interesting. And for example, if you take Red Bull, if you ask someone what's Red Bull, you say it's a soft drink company, but it's not. It's like a media company. They have that's what they actually are.
Yep.
But they're branching out in other things as well. But in the core, they're a media company.
Yep. Exactly. And even now, companies, you get SaaS companies coming on board, getting the mindset of you're not selling software, because anybody can sell software. You're a content company that happens to now have a product to solve problems you're identifying for your user base. And so, just got that flip of mindset. And Ted, it's like, hey, the value, it's great to have all these people coming to the arena, but hey, how many people are engaging outside of here, and how do we expand beyond that? And how do we own it? Why is, the regional sports network, why are they the ones monetizing all the broadcast rights when it's our fans? We're creating this value, they're getting the most money out of it. And sometimes the team is paid fairly for those rights, and sometimes the deals are too small. And how do you do it? Well, you take more ownership of it yourself. Hey, why don't we create this content and monetize it, and we really control it, and it's our brand? Why is everybody else making more money off of what we're doing? Which even from that standpoint, you look at real estate, it's a real estate play now for a lot of teams. One of the frustrating things at Monumental was you're right in Chinatown with a lot of restaurants, right around the arena. And I mean, they don't need to sponsor the team. I mean, they're making a ton of money. Everybody's coming. Well, what do you now see? You see the Battery in Atlanta. They own everything around it. You're seeing a lot more of it's a full real estate play. How do you capitalize and how do you become more of I'm not just a team. I now own the entire experience. Once somebody was within a mile of here, that's ours, and how do we really look at it differently? And it's bringing in the right business people, the right real estate people, the right, lawyers, the right, everybody that can kind of set up those deals and make them work. But it's a total mindset shift.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the social media content creation on the team side. That's something you need to do as well. Like you're also a content creation company now. You're not only a sports team. You're also now the organization is growing and growing.
Yes. Yeah, and it's doesn't do you any good to have millions and millions of followers if you're not monetizing that either. So how do you really use those platforms? And for me, it's been super interesting. I remember when I first started the Caps, our director of digital, started talking about Twitter and 140 characters. We looked at him like, you got to be nuts. There's no way this is ever going to work. And then, but he was at the forefront. Everybody bought in, and we were pretty early on that sort of stuff. And we tried a lot of platforms that that didn't end up going anywhere, but some did. And we always try to be the early adopters on that sort of stuff. Hey, because you got to go where people are. It's one thing to kind of bring people to you to go to a game or whatever, but how do you then go out where everybody else is, engage them, and then use that to then bring them back to you?
Yeah, I think if you don't keep up with these type of things, you lose a lot of, as we mentioned before with segmenting your customer base, there are a lot of types of customers that you're losing out, because now the younger generation, they might not watch a whole game. If they are not at the game, they might not watch a whole game. They might watch only the highlights and going to the TikTok account or the Twitter account. But so to have the complete set with everything to reach everyone. So I had very early on a guest called Jeff Wilson, and he basically split in 4. So he said you have to talk to your customers game day at the stadium, game day not at the stadium, not game day at the stadium, not game day not at the stadium. So if you're thinking like a square there in 4 buckets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think it goes back a little bit to what we're talking about it's a 365 day a year sport. I think the NFL is the first one to really do that, creating all these calendar moments. But every day there's an engagement point, and everybody wants to engage in a different way. So how do you capitalize all that? And you really have to have a strategy around all of that. And I think it becomes not as much now, 15 years ago, especially when the economy was really going down and, people were, sports didn't really get as affected by it, because people starting to look at it of, hey, how do I prioritize what's important in my life? That's where my money is going to go. So when you start tightening the belt, if you become a part of their daily life, if it's, hey, I'm going to forego season tickets or tickets to that game, you can do that. But now if it's, hey, that team is a part of everything that I do and it's, super important to me, now it's more likely I'm going to keep spending that money there. And so the more you engage with everybody at every one of those points, and again, personalization, that standpoint, there's some companies popping up, Credenza and others that look at, hey, I know if you're at the stadium or not at the stadium or where you're at, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to connect with you with relevant content with where you are, if you're watching or not. And hey, if you're checking Facebook and you're getting something, hey, that's going to be different if you're in TikTok or if you're watching my OTT network or if you're in Arena. It's all different experiences, but it all still has to be cohesive, one single message, and making that work.
Definitely. And then you have the entrance of AI. How can that help the experience in the field to tell, for example, queue times, or where is the closest bathroom, and where can you go to the souvenir shop, and where is your seat, and when's the next game, and all of this?
Yeah, and I think that's always been kind of the holy grail, right? The hyper personalization. We've always tried to, first, just getting the collection of the data, who's there. That's always been a challenge. You have, 18,000 people in an arena, maybe a quarter of them, if that, how do you collect that data? And it's through, again, tying the systems together so that then where they're at, when are they, what historically have they done? And then if you can generate, if you can get it one-to-one, great, and eventually you will be able to, but at least now you're able to get to a one-to-few message and really make that relevant for them. And that's, what I think a lot of the power is of AI, through your email communication, your push notifications, all of that really, people appreciate that.
In the beginning, I think personally, I was a little bit hesitant because you felt like it was a little bit intrusive with all of that. But the longer it goes, if you are interested in it, it's actually very helpful that you get this type of notifications. So I guess it's only annoying if it's something that you don't really care about. But if it's your favorite team, you want to get these type of updates.
Exactly. If I'm getting a push notification about something I have no interest in, yeah, why am I letting you know where I'm at? If I'm letting you know where I'm at, and now I'm getting something that you know about me, now you know where I am. Now I'm getting an offer that's super relevant to me. Yeah, I'm happy to give you my information for that. So there's always going to be a trade off of I'll give you my information, you give me some value back for it, and what is that? How to use AI to do that?
So yeah, talking about that, you went to engineering school. So what are some skills that you learned from engineering school that you can now implement in the sports industry?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I did. So I was industrial engineering, so it was very process oriented. I actually worked at FedEx for a number of years. With truck, optimization, route planning, all that sort of stuff, which helps from hey, I'm going to implement an event. Any of that sort of operational stuff. That certainly helped. Being able to justify, measure an ROI on something. It's I'm creating an event. We created a capitalist convention. We had thousands of people come out to these events and engage with the team. How do you build the budget? Then it's not just the finances behind it, but how do you build the right activations, the right events cost effectively to then generate the right ROI, get the right interest out of it, and all look at it all analytically on everything you're doing. So just that difference of mindset and how you approach something, I think is that engineering mindset. I think helps sports overall. Make sure what you're doing is smart. Historically it's been more of hey, we're going to do this event or we're going to run this and we're going to look back and say hey, was it successful or not? But if you plan the right way and you operationalize it the right way, then you can really think about it differently. I think that's probably the biggest piece of what helped me make that transition.
And you have also described yourself as an analytical leader. So how do you think that this side plays into your leadership when you're managing your team?
I mean, I think I always, ask. It's always asking the hard question. Always the why and prove it. You want to do this event. Great. Show me why it's going to work. Show me how you're going to do it. What's your people flow? What is, where are people checking in? How are they buying tickets? Is your revenue going to justify the cost you're spending over here? Everything is, you have to justify why this is a good idea, not just, come up with what is a good idea on paper. And again, we would always build out our business planning every year around three things. It was always, does it grow the brand? Does it grow the fan base? Does it grow revenue? If you can prove to me all three of those with an analytic, spin to it versus, hey, this just seems like a good idea. If you can show me some data that shows, hey, this fan base, like the female fan base, hey, it's only 33% male fan base, is up here. How do we, that's an opportunity to grow. All right, great. How does this do it? And how does it do it while still making money? And if you can do all of those, then hey, we'll go and do it. So I always kind of try to empower my employees to come up with the good ideas, to be able to justify that they are good ideas and not just kind of pie in the sky.
Interesting. The revenue, obviously, that's a calculation. You say that we spend X and the ROI is Y. But when you say grow the brand, how do you measure that?
So yeah, the revenue is that, but it's also sponsorship revenue. Is this something that sponsors want? It's because they've all got their own goals and that sort of stuff. That a lot of times, depending on how your sponsorship department works, they just try to take, hey, here's something I'm going to try to get a sponsor to buy, but maybe it doesn't mix. If you got a sponsor saying, hey, I want this, I want to target these fans or in this way. Hey, is there a fit now? So maybe it's ticket revenue, maybe it's sponsorship revenue. From a brand standpoint, that's where we would do annual surveys, within monthly surveys, sort of from there of measuring likelihood to recommend, your own fanhood, your families, how you're interacting with the brand at all times, what's rank it on, I think it was 1 to 5 or a 1 to 7 scale. They just sort of measure it, that then we could see over time, hey, are we moving the needle on these different do they feel like, hey, the Washington Capitals, do a good job reaching kids? My kids are interested in what the Capitals are doing. Maybe one year it's a 3.5 out of 5. Now the next year it's a 4 out of 5 because we implemented a kids club where we implemented school programs. We'd send our mascot out to engage and run street hockey clinics. And so you do those things. Is it directly that, hey, that led to that? Maybe, but you can at least see, hey, I created all these initiatives and now I tracked it. Now I can see that needle was moving. So now we need to do that again. Or, hey, I created all of these initiatives, didn't move the needle. So, hey, now next year, hey, let's refocus, come up with something different to do. And so kind of being able to track that over time, has been super helpful. And again, it's all a mix of, focus groups and surveys and, all the data that we can get in from all the different, segments.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes marketing initiatives can be a little bit difficult to track versus sales, for example, or revenue dollars. So how do you know that this initiative led to that revenue? Like it's, of course, you can track it somehow, but it's a little bit difficult sometimes, I feel.
Yeah, and if you look at like the in-arena experience, that's always one that is hotly contested within a team because I could just go and sell commercial space and run it on that board. It's going to generate a lot of revenue. Nobody's going to be happy about it, and so you interview the fans, are like, oh, fan experience is not good. They totally are not interested in what's going on. But hey, you're running car commercials and the car companies are paying, so you can say, hey, the revenue justified it. Or how do you create the right content that's going to get the sponsors happy and the eyeballs that's going to engage people? Because one of the things we took pride in was our in-game experience. I think it was ranked number 2 in the NHL. I think behind the Minnesota Wild and number 6 across all of sports for our in-arena experience. And so, putting the right content up there that you can both monetize and is going to keep people engaged and what is then going to eventually fill the arena. Because even if you're getting the sponsorship revenue and if people aren't as interested, now your team's not good. Now, if your experience isn't good, now you're not getting the ticket sales. That's probably going to offload the sponsorship dollars. And, that doesn't work for you either. So yeah, how do you, hey, strong brand. Hey, I'm a fan of the team. I love coming. Hey, I prefer if they win, but I'm not totally, because we sold out every game with the Capitals without ever making it out of the second round of the playoffs when I was there. They won the cup a couple of years after I left, but to be able to still do that, shows I think we had a good balance of what we were creating from a content standpoint and what we were able to do from a sponsorship standpoint.
So I can see like you're really passionate about this and working a lot for many different teams. Is there something you miss from working in team sports now, or do you feel like, yeah, this is a new era in your career, so to speak?
No, I mean, I definitely miss a lot of aspects of it. Because what's nice about it, if you look at marketing, as a whole, what I do marketing is no different than what any other marketer does at Coca-Cola or, anybody else. But hey, it's just the product is different. So to market a product that people care so much about and that you can see the results of it. I built a marketing program for a non-sports client or something like that. Hey, maybe it works, but hey, people aren't writing about it in the Washington Post. You're not getting calls and people getting excited about it and talking about it. I mean, you can see the results and the passion people have it. When you see what the impact it has on the kids and families and gets the entire area. I mean, nothing brings people together more than sports. So you don't have that side of it marketing something else, even though the principles behind the marketing of that are the same. Yeah, so on that standpoint, I miss it. Don't miss the schedule of it. And so it's just a balance of those two. So which that's where, working with teams and, consulting with some teams, you get some of that still, I'm not in it in the trenches day to day, but you do still get exposure to that. I mean, working for something that people care so much about makes a big difference.
It's funny you said that with the schedule because I had a football agent, Linnea Lindmark, on recently, and she named her management agency 5-9 because it's the opposite of a 9 to 5.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's right on. I mean, you get there, and especially like when I started with Monumental, I was just the Capitals. That was, the main piece of it. But then as it became the Wizards and the Mystics, and loved looking for all of them. But hey, now you had the Mystics in. Now you're 12 months a year, and now with the Capitals and Wizards crossing over, I mean, that's four nights a week at the arena right there. And playoffs are awesome. But hey, I've been doing this for however many months, and now you're doing the playoffs, especially if both make it. It's awesome. You have a great time with it, but it'll burn you out too.
Yeah, I understand that. Do you have manage to, meet the players? There are some, as a hockey guy myself, there are some great players in the Capitals and Swedes nonetheless.
Yeah. So we were close with a lot of the alumni. So that was sort of our engagement point. We were fortunate to have a lot, Rod Langway, Hall of Famer, Peter Bondra, a lot of those guys that I would engage with, both, hey, we'd go play golf and we'd bring them out to all of our youth events and they were, as good as could be. I mean, I've worked with the other guys. I mean, certainly, Backstrom and Ovi and all of those guys. Yeah. I mean, I remember, we did a Verizon shoot with Ovi and, they're super great to work with, especially the hockey guys. They're all so down to earth and love working with all of them. So yeah, that was great. Yeah, the alumni were especially fun, because again they were love playing golf and engaging with kids, and now they're older and some of them have real jobs, and but all really personal because they really appreciate the support they've always gotten from the city, and to stay there and engage with everybody was always awesome to see.
So you've had an incredible journey in the sports industry and so much success as we have talked about. But has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I mean, I think the main bump was probably so I was in DC for a number of years, and so when you start out, pretty much the way you usually move up in sports is to move around. And so when I came out of business school, I hooked on with a guy that became my mentor, Tim McDermott, with the Eagles. And so, I went, went to work in Philly, was there for a bit, then went down to Washington with the Redskins, then went back to the Eagles. So it's kind of bouncing up and down 95. And then, the movement and everything else. And then with the games and like I said, the schedule, all of that sort of stuff to then keep doing that once you have the four kids and everything else becomes more of a challenge. Especially now. So we live right outside of Atlanta, and I mean, we're never leaving. The kids are settled in here. This is where we're at. So it definitely constrains, from an in-person, which is where the virtual agency, helps, but, even if I wanted to work for another team, we're never going to move. And so that definitely limits my options from some of that standpoint, but it's all a balance. And again, the new world of, virtual remote work, has been, really good. But I would think just the lifestyle shift that you see from, hey, when you're right out of school, getting into sports to 20 years later, what your life looks like, and it creates additional challenges, but different opportunities as well.
Yeah, of course I understand that. As we talked about with not a 9 to 5 and when the family situation, of course, it makes it a bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, I got a call not long ago from a pretty large golf organization, which would have been an awesome job, and the hours set wouldn't have been bad, but got to move, and it's and especially some of the sports organizations, they're still not as open to remote work. The startups and such are, but most others are run more old school, and they're not. It's like I can't move, even if it is only 6 hours away. We just can't. So, whereas if I got that call 15 years ago, yep, I'm there, pack my bags and, load up the U-Haul and go do it. So,
of course. You mentioned your mentor, Tim. How important has that been for you and helped you in your career?
Yeah, I mean, he was, extremely helpful. We became, really good friends too. He was actually in my wedding, but when I was getting out of business school at Duke, I met a guy who was a Duke undergrad some years ago with doing sponsorship sales. He just moved out to Arizona to open up this University of Phoenix Stadium's the deal he did. He introduced me to this guy, Tim McDermott, who had just came from outside of sports, from Comcast Strategy Group. And so that was crucial for me because at the time when I was in business school, the whole debate was, hey, is a business degree valued in sports? And the answer basically was, it depends on the person you work for has one. And so, he did. And so he valued, even though, it was a, fairly level job at the time, to come in and run some high level projects for him. And then he ended up going to DC as the CMO of the Capitals. He brought me down there. So then I kind of followed him down and then continued to learn from him and sort of kind of, write a little bit what he was doing and learn from him and that. So have, how he valued and just thinking about things differently. He's always got a different eye to things. And now, he's with the Philadelphia Union. Now he's president there and, he's been there for a number of years and, it's, similar, real estate and how they're looking at things. And I mean, we still, text and chat and, he's always looking for the next thing. So we talk about kind of having an eye for some of that. I think he instilled a lot of that in me as well to think about things differently, which coming from outside of sports initially for him, was valuable. And, he was extremely helpful in my career, both, from the path as well as sort of the learnings I got from him.
Have you had the opportunity to be a mentor to someone now when you have had some experience?
Yeah, so I've tried to, get back to getting out of business school with, hey, breaking out and especially getting summer internships in business school. It's not like teams go and recruit. It's not like, there's a table at the Duke recruiting day for Philadelphia, And so, but every summer I would always try to have a business school student, usually it was from Duke, but then, I actually hired, a guy from NYU. And so then if it was a Stern, but, either a Duke or a Stern summer intern, and it was always going to, hey, pay it forward. I want to find, somebody there, bring them in and work with them. And there's been a number of those that I've stuck with through the years. Actually, there was one guy that, came on, he worked with me, for the summer, and then we hired him. And then when I went to Chicago, brought him up there and, we remained, super tight and, like to think I was a mentor to him, but, giving those opportunities and guidance and helping open those doors is something I've always wanted to do. Whether it was somebody actually hired or, I'll never turn down a conversation with any student just looking to break into the industry, or anybody that's, been there for a while trying to figure out where they go next. Do I go to business school? Do I stay here? Is this what I want to do? I'm always open to those conversations and helping however I can.
That's fantastic. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to work in the sport industry?
The advice I always give is meet as many people as you can, have as many conversations as you can as early as you can. It's, especially, if you're in school or recently out of school, finding graduates from your program that are working in sports. And I mean, there's not many that won't have a 15, 20-minute conversation with you, going to events, meeting face to face and staying in touch, because really the way hiring in sports often works is, I could go out, I could post a job, go on Teamwork Online or whatever, I might get 1,000 resumes in. I don't have time to go through 1,000 resumes. Where I end up hiring from is, hey, it's somebody that's here as an intern who I've kind of met here, or I email my counterpart, when I was in DC at the Nationals or DC United, hey, do you have anybody? And so, or just think back of, hey, who have I talked to? So if somebody's engaged with me, because odds are when they meet somebody that's working in the industry, even if, they want to work for them, they're probably not going to have a job there. But, if you can stay on the radar screen, eventually one of those doors is going to open up. Yeah, so for me, like with Tim, he and I hit it off immediately. He basically offered me a job, the first time we spoke. But I mean, he was probably the 150th phone call I'd had over that year, and that was the one that panned out. And so as many of those conversations and following up and just getting, because it's just, not what, it's not who it's who knows you, and so making sure you're on everybody's radar screen as much as you can, is really, I think, the key.
I love that. And as you said, like reaching out 150 plus phone calls, doing that politely and, with what I've said many times on this podcast, if you send an email, for example, if you do, to whom it may concern, I'm very interested, like be more personalized, like look, who are you actually messaging? And then you should do some research before reaching out that I like what you did there or with this or this project, and I would like to XYZ. And then the key, as you said, also to follow up. If you have made a connection, to follow up, because otherwise it will die out.
Yep, exactly. I've had plenty of those where I couldn't remember who I talked to. It's like I talked to somebody and 6 months later I've got a job and they never followed up. I talked to so many people, I never remember. And then always phrasing it as, hey, I want to learn, it's never, hey, I'm looking for a job. Will you talk to me? It's, I'm going to learn from your experience. People love talking about themselves. So if you set it up that way, you kind of stroke the ego in some of what they've done, like you said, and they focus on, I'd really like to take 15, 20 minutes to really learn from your experiences and get advice from you. People love giving advice and talking about themselves. So.
Exactly. That's good for this podcast because I've actually not so many people as I expected say no.
Yep.
Of course, people do say no, but as you said, like probably many people like to not only talk about themselves, but to share their experience and to give something back also to the audience.
Yeah, never know where a conversation's going to go. It's somebody watches this that, hey, there's a connection that I can make and that I can either help them or maybe they've got something for me. And you never know where anything's going to go. That's why I never turn down a call with a company or a student or anything like that. Always happy to talk.
It was really cool. Like it was quite recently. I had a performance coach on like a while back, and he sent me a message that he got a client that heard about him from this podcast.
Oh,
so
awesome.
that could be something, and that those small things makes me really happy. But then you see, like, if you can help one person in the beginning, this podcast was very like, I want to learn, and it still is. Like, I'm curious, I want to learn. But also, if you can also help someone else, that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if any of your audience is looking for any of our services, always feel free to reach out.
Yes, of course. So that's your plug.
That's my plug. Yeah, no, we're always looking. Said we work with small companies, big companies. Sometimes same thing. Sometimes I'm just talking to a small startup with an idea, and I'm never going to get anything out of it. But I've worked with enough companies now, kind of help them with, hey, here's how you can raise money, and here's some thoughts about building your pitch decks, and here's why your business might or might not work. And I mean, who knows? 10 years later, they've closed their Series A, and they're hiring a team, and you never know. Or maybe they decide, hey, this isn't work for me, and they pivot and are successful in something else.
That's it. So if the listeners want to reach out to you or your company, how can they do that best?
Yep. Our website is nextuppartners.com. You kind of check out some of our services, that sort of stuff. But really, look me up on LinkedIn, Joe Dupriest or Joe at NextUp sportsmanagement.partners.net. Either one, send me a note. I don't really do the Calendly. It's going to have you send me a note. We'll find time to connect. So, I'll be flexible. Reach out there. LinkedIn's always the best way, but any way you can find me, love to chat and connect.
Fantastic. I like to end these chats with a networking question. We talked a lot about that just recently here. So who from your network do you think would be a good guest for this podcast?
Let's see. I'll give you a couple. So one of my business partners, I got two co-founders, Shripal Shah. He recently published a couple of sports marketing and AI books. So he would be really interesting. So he and I worked at the Redskins back in the day. We're on the Make-A-Wish board together in DC. So we've remained close. So he's a little bit different spin on some of what we do. But yeah, from his AI experience. He also ran a social media company out of Australia and worked for a dev company out of DC. So, from the technology standpoint, I think he'd be really interesting for you. And there's another guy, Brand Bolton, who I've known for a number of years. He's another. I actually had him on one of my panels when I was been to school at Duke. I think he was at a camp at the time. It was that agency, but he's been a Clear. He's been at, a variety of sports properties. He was at Octagon. So he's seen the property side, the team side, he's done a lot out there. And so, I think he would be really valuable from a lot of, and he's been a founder too. He's got a startup called Course IQ, which is a management system for golf courses that he's getting out there too. And he pitched at one of our demo day events. So he's seen every area of sports, and, he's always one that I'll point anybody to that wants to talk and learn. He's a good source. So those are my two.
That's fantastic. Great tips. Joe, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for participating on Sports Management Podcast.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportmpodcast.